Before we get started, I want to let you all know of the following trigger warnings for this video. That said, this is an educational video designed to help people avoid harm in their own lives and in the lives of their families. So I really do appreciate everybody watching and engaging with it, because I know that these type of videos can get hidden. Also, this is not going to be as edited as a lot of my other videos. This is probably the 6th attempt I've tried to make this video. It is very hard for me, but it's really important for me to get content out in the world. Please bear with me. Hi. My name is Erin Moriarty, and I am one of the first children groomed on the internet. Now, obviously, I don't have a certificate or a citation that says that. What I do know is that back in the late 90s when this happened, there were not a lot of children on the internet, and when we reported it, the authorities really didn't know how to handle it. So first off, what happened? I think a lot of people nowadays are familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, but back in the 90s, things like that and role-playing were really not that popular, especially with the Catholic school crowd that I knew. So a couple of the friends that I knew that were into such things played a similar game online in a type of game called a multi-user dungeon. Basically, all you need to know is it's kind of like a chat room in a Dungeons and Dragons session put together. A bunch of people played together on the same server, and it was through this that I, at 15 years of age, met who I'm just going to refer to as number one. Number one was 24 years old, and he knew how to program. He was working as one of the moderators or admins on this mud, and he and I bonded initially on a love of things like Lord of the Rings. I am currently 39 years old, and I know that I don't look like it. So obviously at 15, I did not look even 15. I looked maybe 12. So I don't want people to get this twisted and think that this is one of those situations where I looked older or there was any possible way that he could have mistaken me. He knew that I was 15 going into this. He had seen a photograph that I had taken with a Polaroid and scanned in for him, and he told me that if I would be his girlfriend, he would teach me how to program. Now, at this point in my life, I was having a lot of problems in school because I had ADHD. And back then, ADHD treatment was basically they handed you a pill and they told you to sit down, shut up, and do your homework. A lot of it was centered around willpower and needing to try harder. Even as neurodiversity isn't understood today, it is understood better than it was back then. I was desperate to be some sort of computer programmer, video game designer, anything of that sort. And I saw in him someone who could teach me how to program and a way that I could perhaps avoid having to go to college, because I didn't think I was going to be able to graduate college. I was having a hard enough time in high school. I think a lot of times in these circumstances, the assumption is that the parents are not involved or the parents aren't aware, what have you. I have the complete opposite scenario. The reason I had a computer was because my dad had got into computers. My dad was very observant of everything that I was doing in the house. That's how they eventually found out. But because of that, because they were what we would now call helicopter parents, I got very good at evading them. I was good with computers. I would sneak down to the computer lab at school. I would get onto the mud when I wasn't supposed to, and we would talk and we would have our worst conversations there, or we would have our worst conversations after my dad went to bed. I love my parents and now we have a great relationship, but a combination of factors really interfered with our relationship back then. First off, there was the whole situation about ADHD and the misconceptions, and there were a lot of people that were going on the news, people like Dr. Phil, and saying that ADHD was overdiagnosed and we shouldn't be giving medication to kids and things of that nature. This planted doubt in my mom's mind, and this coupled with things that my psychiatrists were saying made my parents feel like I was just lazy, I wasn't trying hard enough, and that if I just tried harder, that I would be better in school. And that's just not the case when you're neurodivergent. You need the supports that you need to do better. This formed a fissure in our relationship that caused me to want to find a way out. I thought I would never be successful as an adult because I wasn't doing well in school. I thought if I didn't learn how to program that I was never going to be able to get a job, and that even if I couldn't learn how to program from this guy, at least maybe he could marry me and then he could work and I could have health insurance through him and I could get my needs met that way. Even at that young age, I was so concerned that I was not going to be able to succeed as an adult and that I was going to need somebody to take care of me. And this really put it in my mind that I didn't have a lot of value to bring to a relationship. All of these things made it a really attractive proposal when this 24-year-old man who knew how to program, who could hypothetically get a job if he wanted to, I thought he just, I don't know, he didn't have a job at the time, but anyway, I thought he could get a job. I thought maybe he could teach me. Being his girlfriend didn't seem like the worst thing in the world, and especially because he was all the way in Wales. What was the harm that could be had? And the harm that could be had is the seeds that are planted. And it really frustrates me when influencers and commentary channels act like conversations over the internet don't have a long-term effect on a child's life. when it is somebody that you look up to or that you aspire to be like, even if that aspiration doesn't make sense to other people, if you feel that aspiration, you will do anything to get their attention, even if it's something that you don't feel entirely comfortable with. And a lot of the things that he told me in these conversations were things that were never countered by other people in my life, and because they weren't being countered by people in my life, I didn't realize they were false until many years later. He told me things like, there's so much darkness inside of you that only a man that is much older than you, that has been through darkness himself, will ever see your light. And I went into future relationships with that idea. Let's get into number 2. When my parents found out about number 1, they basically freaked. They took away my internet access. I couldn't go over a lot of my friends' houses anymore. I wasn't allowed to go to anything like a sleepover or anything like that. And they told my school that I wasn't allowed unattended in the computer lab. This, plus the fact that I'd been hacking into the computers at the school, let the school know that I was probably a little bit too advanced for their curriculum in computer classes, which, like, the best, most advanced class that they had was like Excel back then. They put me in independent study with a computer teacher, and I assume that the school told this teacher why I needed to be chaperoned so closely. Unfortunately, this teacher was also somebody who liked children, or at least he didn't seem to have the things that would be necessary to succeed with women his own age, and he seemed to compensate with that by touching me and hugging me and feeling me whenever I would do something good. And as much as it made me feel bad, and as much as I realized that it was a weird situation, it was the first person who had ever shown any type of romantic attraction in me. As a queer kid in a Catholic school who was very neurodivergent and who the guys weren't interested in, and who the girls at school would have never shown interest in because they would have gotten in a lot of trouble, I thought that no one was ever going to show interest in me. And it took me many years after that to realize that I wasn't ugly, I wasn't broken. Like, first off, I wasn't even a full-grown adult. I was sitting there comparing myself to the hot women back then who were like women like Pamela Anderson. I didn't have access to the language back then to realize that I was non-binary. So I didn't understand why I felt so inadequate yet so dysphoric about so many things about womanhood. All I knew was that I wasn't some blonde with big boobs who could cook really well and wanted to birth a bunch of kids. I enjoy androgyny and computer games and making art. I'm not really into cooking. I'm not really into the nuclear family. That's not me. And I was so, even though I knew in my heart of hearts that that's not what I wanted, so many sources were telling me if that wasn't the only way, which was school was presenting, it was definitely the easiest way. One of my best friends since childhood has 2 moms, and I saw the situations that they got into growing up because there wasn't a man in the house and because they didn't have that income and everything like that. And I don't mean to say that those relationships are intrinsically flawed, just the way society handles them is so intrinsically flawed. So much of society presented women as nags and gold diggers and awful, entitled people. And I didn't even have the capacity to appreciate my own mother. So even though I knew that it was wrong that this man was touching me, even though I knew that it wasn't what I wanted, I also knew 2 other things. I knew that some attention was better than none. And I knew that if he didn't do it to me, he was going to choose somebody else. And I was already messed up. My life was already fucked, in my opinion. So it was a really easy sacrifice for me to just take it for the team, especially because I knew he was taking pictures of one of my friends. And like, not like a couple of pictures. Like, he would just take a lot of pictures of the girls in class, and he eventually got fired for taking pictures of this girl and would later serve time for harming another child. So at least in that instance, I know that that individual did see punishment and hopefully isn't hurting anybody else. At minimum, he's on the registry and can't work with children anymore. Number 3, I didn't realize how problematic it was until a couple years ago, because I was 16 and he was 18 at the time. Much like the second offender took the seeds planted by the first and worked on it, I confided in this man who I thought was a friend what had happened to me at school and on the internet. And I hoped because he was related to a pastor that he was going to be somebody who I could confide in. And I thought that he wanted a relationship with me because he kind of acted like he might want one. But if I would try to hug him or something like that, he would always shake me away. But if we were at work together, he would grab my hands and shove it down his pants. And when we would count down the registers at night, he would count down the register while I took care of his business. It was totally an abuse of his power as somebody who was my boss at the time and as somebody who I thought I could confide trauma into. He took all of that, knowing that what had happened to me, coupled with my Catholic school education, had left me feeling dirty and like I was at fault. And I thought he was comforting me and telling me that it wasn't my fault and things like that because he legitimately believed it wasn't my fault. But no, he just realized that if you really flatter young people who are in a vulnerable state, those young people will let you get away with things just because the trauma that they have been through prevents them from making the right decisions. I'm confident if the first two things wouldn't have happened to me, that thing three wouldn't have happened to me. And it didn't end with him. The ideals that were planted, these seeds that were planted in my mind by these people, were fertilized and watered by a number of the men that I dated. If you look at my dating history, it's often much older men, often people that were much further along in life than me. They had better jobs, or they had jobs, or they were old enough to drink at the time. I started dating a 21-year-old when I was 17. And my parents allowed it at the time because I think they knew on some level that I was going to go behind their back otherwise because I was getting close to 18, and that if they allowed it, that at least it would probably fizzle out and end. And back then we didn't realize how harmful it was to have that big of a relationship disparity when you are that young, when you are that uncertain of who you are. Because my queer identity had been suppressed the entire time that I was in school. I didn't really understand my neurodivergency until TikTok came out. It wasn't until I finally got access to the right kinds of information and knowledge about how traumatic these scenarios I had been through were. I thought because I had never had a PNV R-word situation that nothing bad happened to me, and because my parents were very helicoptery, that they were always there and we had a great relationship and we were so close. And yeah, now we have a great relationship and we're so close because we have worked through a lot of the bullcrap that society put in my parents' heads about how to raise a child, about what neurodivergency was, about how risky it is to be in relationships with an age disparity. And my mom told me, but at that point I was coming up on adulthood. She did the best thing that she could do, which was be there and support me and pick up the pieces every time one of these situations went wrong. Because these people weren't in love with me. They were in love with this seed of a person who had been created by these harmful people. They loved that I tried to people please, that I tried to be the best girlfriend that I could possibly be to them. That because I had my own mental health problems, that I was content to work as their therapist, that I knew a lot of things to help be their therapist, and that I would simultaneously try and be their mommy and their psychiatrist, but also weirdly be this virginal ingenue type person. And let me tell you, a lot of people give Belle Delphine hell, and I get it. There's a lot of things that Belle Delphine has done that I don't entirely agree with, but Belle Delphine was preyed upon before she was of age. And when that happens to you, a lot of what you are told about why you're attractive and how to use that attractiveness it's jailbait. I remember some of my earliest boyfriends, some of the things that they loved was when I would wear my schoolgirl uniform, when I would let them take pictures of me in my schoolgirl uniform, anything that made me look younger, which when you consider the age gap is already a little bit weird. And obviously not every every single person was doing all of these things. But when you consider the fact that I had no idea how to form a real relationship with any of these people, and they were in love with the idea of me and not me, what would happen is after about 9 to 18 months, I could not be the people-pleasing mask that I was putting on for them anymore, and I left. It was very hard for me as I got older and started looking older to feel attractive without looking young. And it's gross that that ideal has been put in my head, and I have such a hard time shaking that, because it's not just the people that hurt me. There are so many things in society that say, this is fine. It's okay to date people that are older than you. But like, even if it's not illegal, oftentimes what happens is the older person in this scenario is looking for somebody that they can mold into the perfect partner for them without any regard for the younger person's will or desires or who they want to be or what they want to be. A lot of the problems that happened in my relationships were when I tried to open up about myself, and then the people that I was with would think that the things that I wanted to do were silly. Or I've said it before in my videos, I wanted to be a YouTuber since 2006, but a lot of my exes did not like the idea that guys would be attracted to me if I was on the internet. I put so much of myself on hold because I thought so lowly of myself. I had done so poorly in school. I had done so poorly in college. A lot of my relationships were falling apart. My parents had done so much to try and help me and try and give me a successful life. And I can see a really clear path from when I started really having problems in school, because it was homework. Grades were homework based, not on what you actually knew, and I could never do the homework. I was trying to put a round peg in a square hole my entire life. I didn't understand why I always felt like an alien, why I always felt unaccepted, why I never really felt like my significant other loved me, but rather loved the idea of me. A lot of the people that I dated ended up marrying women who just don't tell them no or don't have a lot of strong personalities. A lot of them still try and think that they can hook up with me to this day. Like, several of them are now married and have tried to get me to be the other woman, which I'm like, no. Even if the older partner is just stopping the younger partner from making mistakes, I think that's still changing who they're going to turn into as a person. I think we really shelter our kids from making mistakes of their own. And then they get into the corporate world where making a mistake can be a huge life-altering thing. Like, you can lose your entire career over making a mistake. And you didn't go through making the mistake phases as a child. I had to go through my mistake-making phase in my mid-20s and in my mid-30s, because since I'd spent my entire adult life in relationships and just trying to put on a mask of what the person I was dating wanted me to be, I was 38 years old and had no idea who I actually was, what I actually wanted. And when I investigated it, I realized there was this whole person who I had abandoned at 15. And I'm like, why? I started talking to my psychiatrist. Why did I abandon that person? Why did I stop being that person? And it was because so many people were whispering into my ear what I was, what I wasn't, what I had to offer, that I didn't have to offer much, and that only people like them would ever see the value that I have to offer. I think the most important part of this video is to try and address to parents who might be seeing this what they can do to protect the children in their life. And I think the single biggest thing that you can do to protect your child from predators is to support that child who they are in their identity and not try to make them into somebody else. I was having a lot of problems in school, but I wasn't a bad kid. And a lot of the messaging that my mother was getting from outside about ADHD was fulfilling this idea, it was putting this notion in place that ADHD was fake, it was overdiagnosed, it especially didn't happen in little girls, and that I just wasn't trying hard enough. And when you are trying your hardest every day of your life, but everybody around you believes you're not even trying at all, It's soul crushing. Mental illness, neurodivergency, they are very difficult things for a child to deal with, especially in a modern world. Not supporting a kid's queer identity, not getting your child the support that they need for their neurodivergency, trying to force your kid into one career when they're desperate to do another career. All of these things form gaps in relationships that these harmful people can get into. These harmful people are extremely good at identifying kids who are vulnerable. The kids that go to message boards and they say, I'm gay and my mom doesn't support it. So many of these children are just desperate to feel like their parents love them for who they are without having to change. I think another thing that factors into it is just a lot of the uncertainty that my generation onward has had about our living situation. I worked my butt off for like 20 years, and there were very few times when I could successfully pay for all of my things myself. And a lot of the messages that I was getting from society had harmed my relationships with women. I had been told that women were just competition and that they were catty and they were bitches, and had so much internalized misogyny that I couldn't even reach out and make friends that were women or that were non-binary or that were none of the above. I thought that only men got me. On top of that, the men that tended to get me, unfortunately, were at least the ones that knew how to talk the talk and pretend like they got me, which they don't need to get you. You're a child and they're an adult. In general, it's usually fairly easy for someone with significantly more life experience to kind of tell if somebody younger is insecure and is faking it and is vulnerable or not. If you're a child in this situation, or if you were in this situation in the past, you are not at fault. No matter what you did, you were a child. The adults around you, especially the person who perpetrated against you, they were the ones responsible for protecting you, not you. And I think one of the problems is that when you're a child, you don't even realize how bad what has happened to you is. Because I just thought it was so cool that this 24-year-old liked me. And then it wasn't until like shortly after my 24th birthday, I was reminded of what had happened in the past, and it shook me. I was talking to a cousin who was 15, and they were, in my eyes, so immature. And not like in a bad way, but in a, I don't see how a 24-year-old person looks at a 15-year-old person and thinks, that is an adult that I am going to be in a relationship with. This is probably not the only video that I'm going to do on this topic. I feel like there is not a lot of research on the long-term impact of this harm happening to people. If you're somebody that this has happened to, one of the things that I can tell you, I know this title is, it ruined my life. And for many years, it really did. But when I got the support that I needed in place, when I got the right therapy, when my therapists told me, even though it didn't happen, you still went through something that was traumatic, it wasn't until then that I was able to really start being myself and living my life for myself. And I just want to tell you that if you're going through this, I know how dark it can be. It can be so dark, especially because I am not going into anywhere near the IPV that I suffered in the relationships that I had as an adult. That can be another subject for another day. It can be hard to heal at first because societally we do not believe that psychological damage is that big of a deal. But it is, and it can hurt you in ways that cause long-term physical side effects. I have a lot of pelvic pain because of this. I have pudendal neuralgia because of the harm that has happened to me in relationships. And it wasn't until I understood that and got the help that I needed and got people around me that validated, yes, what you went through was bad, but you didn't deserve for it to happen. No child deserves for this to happen. No matter what you do, you are a child. Adults in your life are supposed to protect you. And if they didn't, I am so, so sorry. But what I can say is that I never thought I would find other people in my life who would protect me and care for me and love me for me the way my current friend group does. And they do. And it is so good to have that. And I really hope that if you're struggling that you get there too. Again, if you've watched this far, thank you so much, because you've really helped me with my watch time, which as a small channel helps me a lot. As I said, I think this video is going to get hidden by the algorithm. So I really do appreciate it a lot. If you've watched this far, you must like something, so please like, comment, and subscribe. If you want to see any other videos on this topic, please let me know in the comments below. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.